And so the first step is to explain, what does that mean when I say transit overlay district? And so we have to back up a couple steps to about 3 years ago, well, actually about 5 years ago, when Wake County and the transit agency for the county, Go Triangle, adopted a transit plan called the Wake Transit Plan that proposed a new type of transit service called bus rapid transit. And it's a very high quality, high capacity transit service that operates with buses on rubber tires on the road. And the bus usually has a dedicated lane that other vehicles can't use. There is a platform that's larger than a typical bus stop that's covered. It's very comfortable. There are displays usually that tell you when the next bus is arriving. So there's a lot of advantages to this service. It really operates almost more like a train than a bus, with the benefit being that it's much less expensive to implement. So that's coming to 4 different corridors in Raleigh, 2 of which are Western Boulevard, and then a southern corridor that we'll talk about tomorrow evening, that's from downtown Raleigh to Garner. Right. And so after that was adopted, the city initiated a planning process called Equitable Development around Transit around 2018. And that process asked the community, the Raleigh community, and particularly the areas around these transit routes, how should the city grow in the future, especially around this new transit service? And what we heard with a pretty strong majority from that process was that people thought that new development and additional density to serve Raleigh's growth should really be focused on areas that have access to high quality transit service so that there wouldn't be as much reliance on vehicles. And so one of the outcomes of that planning process was a guidebook called the Equitable Transit-Oriented Development Guidebook. And one of the recommendations was that we should have this overlay district applied to our zoning map that creates zoning laws, the rules for how you can develop your property, that are supportive of people using this new transit service. And so that's what we have. It's called a transit overlay district. So it's a type of zoning. It goes on top of an existing zoning on a piece of property, and it adds new rules to that piece of property. And those rules are intended to basically discourage types of land uses that are based on people using cars a lot or are oriented towards cars, and to encourage land uses and development types that encourage walking, cycling, and using transit, and having an area that is active, where people have a lot of destinations, places to go to, jobs, services, shopping, that are within a walking distance of the transit service. So what does that look like? So these are some of the images from that Equitable Transit-Oriented Development Guidebook. And these are, sort of fairly urban context type development patterns. But this gives you a sense of how an area that is currently developed with more car-oriented or suburban type development, so single-story shopping centers with large parking lots, how those types of areas could change over time based on this overlay district and using this overlay district as the regulation that guides that development, that they could become more urban and more suited to transit service. And so you can kind of see there can be additional height and more density that would have housing and jobs. And another key thing that that guidebook talks about is that that change doesn't have to be complete redevelopment. It doesn't have to mean the existing development pattern is completely removed and completely replaced. It can be something that actually builds on the existing development pattern. So the image you see on the left is a good example of how an existing shopping center with a surface parking lot could actually fill in with additional buildings that have housing, employment, and shoppers for that very same shopping center. So instead of those shoppers getting there by driving and parking their car in the parking lot, they live there or work there or get there by a very high quality bus service. And you have just as many people, if not more people, that are able to shop at that shopping center, but also a number of other things in the area like housing and shopping and services. And then the other thing that the transit-oriented overlay district is intended to do is to have the public spaces or plazas or areas along the street to also be supportive of walking, have it be a comfortable space for pedestrians and not have as much focus on vehicles. So how does all of that work, right? Those are all things that seem nice, seem like a positive change for the city of Raleigh. And so then the question is, what does the overlay district actually do to private property and the ability to develop it in the future to serve those purposes? And so we're going to walk through a couple of the key aspects of this overlay district. There are a few other things that we won't mention here, but that we can discuss if there's particular questions. So the first thing is the overlay district prohibits certain uses. So uses that are either oriented towards vehicles and driving, or that are not supportive of the use of the transit service. And so here you can see a lot of those. So drive-through restaurants, car washes, vehicle repair shops, those types of things would not be allowed in the transit overlay district. And an important thing to note is that if those things already exist, they can continue to operate. This doesn't mean those things have to close down. It just means that in the future, when there's new development, you can't build a new one of those things. And that also applies to the two things you see in that first bullet point, which is single family housing and duplex housing. So those things would also be prohibited in the overlay district. Again, if you already have those things, there's no one saying you can't continue to live there. And if you want to repair and maintain your property, absolutely. It's just that in the future, the ability to build new development, new neighborhoods with those things would be prohibited by the overlay. So, the next thing that the overlay does is it sets a minimum height of 2 stories. And that is intended to prevent single-story development like you see in a lot of places today in Raleigh. The historic development pattern in many commercial corridors in Raleigh is a single-story shopping center with a parking lot, and then there's residential uses behind that go into a neighborhood area. And so what this is saying is we don't need to be separating those uses anymore. We can combine retail, offices, housing within the same development. And the way you do that is with multi-story development. And so it prohibits single-story development, again, for new development. So if you have an existing store, an existing single-story development, existing one-story house, you do not need to vacate those. No one's going to tell you can't continue to use those, maintain those, repair those. This means if there's new development, it will need to be 2 stories. The other thing it does is when you map the overlay district on a residential district, it enables that property to be developed as if it was zoned residential mixed use. So that means any of the residential building types, or not any, excuse me, the multifamily residential building types, so townhouse and apartments, and that they can have a height of up to 4 stories and 60 feet. It is important to note that in that situation, there still would be neighborhood transition requirements where those properties are adjacent to residential zoning that doesn't have the overlay district. And finally, so I kind of mentioned this a few times, but I want to get into a little bit of specifics about what happens if you have an existing building, existing use that becomes prohibited by the overlay district, because I think that's why a lot of people are here. There's going to be a lot of questions about what does this mean for my existing building or property. And so this is what I want to walk through, and we will also take questions on this, but to just have everyone get to see this is that there's 2 ways that these things are regulated. The structure and the use are differentiated in city zoning. So the structure is the building, the use is the business or the type of basically a business is the most common situation here that is in the building. So for structures, if you have a structure that becomes non-conforming, which is most likely going to be because of that 2-story height minimum, then you can still repair, maintain, and even if you wanted to rebuild that house within the same footprint, if it was damaged, you could still do that. If you wanted to expand that structure, if you had a 1-story house that you wanted to expand, then you would have to go to the Board of Adjustment and get a special use permit unless the addition is 2 stories. So then the other part is about uses. So you have uses that becomes non-conforming. So suppose you have a car wash or a vehicle repair shop, and it becomes non-conforming. Again, you can repair, maintain, even renovate if it's basically the same building, same size and scale of building, you can even redo the facade. but you cannot expand the use. If you want to expand the use, like make the footprint larger, you would need to go to the Board of Adjustment and get a special use permit. All right, so that's what it does. Now, where is it going to go? And this is where we have gotten specific with this rezoning since the last time we had public meetings for it. So we do have a proposed zoning map that city staff will be submitting as a formal rezoning application in the coming weeks. And that is what will go forward to the Planning Commission and the City Council. Now, that's not to say that that's set in stone. That's part of the Planning Commission and City Council process, is they can figure out, okay, are all of these areas appropriate for this overlay district? But we have to start somewhere. You have to submit an application at some point. And so this is the boundaries of the district that we are starting with for this application. And so the best way to see that is on the internet. If you go to the webpage for this project, which is called Tod Mapping. And so it's pretty easy to find. If you go on a search engine and search Raleigh Tod Mapping, or go on the city website, raleighnc.gov, and search for Tod Mapping, it's pretty easy to get to. And then towards the bottom of that page is a link that says the Tod Mapping Viewer or Overlay Viewer. And so you can get to this online map. You can zoom in, you can pan around, you can type in your address to find your particular property. And basically, it's pretty simple. There's a dark purple area that is the areas that are proposed to be included in this rezoning request. So how did we decide where to actually draw those down? How did we choose those properties to be included? And so it was, we started with the philosophy of the equitable development around transit process and the equitable transit-oriented development guidebook. And then we said, how does that, what are the specific details of how we would apply it? And so the key thing was, well, areas that are within a certain distance of the bus rapid transit service and areas that are likely to or already recommended to develop in a way that supports use of the transit service. And so that means we started with a distance of a quarter mile from the bus rapid transit corridor. So in this case, Western Boulevard, from roughly Boylan Avenue to I-40. And within that quarter mile buffer on either side, we then said, okay, which of those properties are likely to either already develop in a way that is supportive of transit or likely to or recommended to in the future. And so the way we define that is there mixed use zoning or industrial zoning already there? Also, does the future land use map suggest that there should be mixed use zoning or medium or higher density residential zoning on the site? And just, for those who are not familiar with the future land use map, that is a policy map that's in the city's comprehensive plan that says what type of development pattern and density should occur in the future and how the zoning could be changed in the future to support that type of development. And so we looked at that map and said, okay, if there are areas that are already suggested for that type of development, we'll include those. And then if there are areas that didn't meet any of those first two criteria, but were directly touching the bus rapid transit corridor, so property touching Western Boulevard that might be zoned residential or might not be recommended for higher density residential in the future, but if it's directly touching Western Boulevard, that seems like an appropriate place to start suggesting that there be something other than low density residential in the future. And then property that is either developed with apartments or townhouses or owned by the same entity as apartments or townhouses, and then city-owned property that's not already developed with a park or greenway. Then we said there are some areas that don't make sense for transit-oriented development. So, some pretty obvious ones. Cemeteries, we do not expect to ever develop, and that is completely appropriate. State property, the state has their own authority of how they develop their property. We can't really tell them through our zoning. It's complicated, but suffice to say, the state has their own ability to say what they want to do with their property that we have difficulty overriding. So we don't want to create that conflict. Similar story with public schools, public and private schools and universities. So, those properties need to be developed in a way that suits educational purposes, which might not be in the same way that suits transit ridership, and that is fine because that is the purpose of that property. And then the railroads and historic features. So we are, in terms of the process, we are at the point that's called the first neighborhood meeting. And so some of you may know that we had a previous set of public meetings back in November of last year. Those are not required in the zoning code to be part of the rezoning process, but we did decide to have that extra step just because this is such a large and impactful rezoning that we need to have more than just what the zoning ordinance requires for this process. So now we are officially in the typical zoning process, and that means this is what's called a first neighborhood meeting. So that's required before we can submit the application. And then the next step is that we will submit the application, like I said, in the coming weeks. We will have another neighborhood meeting, and we'll do 2 of those just like this. We'll do one for Western and one for Southern BRT corridors. And then once we've had that second neighborhood meeting, we can go to the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission will also be a public meeting. They'll probably have multiple meetings on this case, this rezoning case, because again, it is so large and impactful. I am almost certain that they will not take action on it in a single meeting. Then the Planning Commission, when they have finished their review, which may include adding or removing properties, and that is part of how Planning Commission and City Council approach these large city-initiated rezonings. They can choose to change those boundaries as part of their review. The Planning Commission would make a recommendation to the City Council. The City Council receives that. They will have another public hearing and probably take more than one meeting. Again, I think the City Council will want more than one meeting to look at this. And then the City Council at that point can make the final decision to approve or deny and modify and then approve, if that is their choice, the overlay district. So you are already participating this evening by being at this meeting, but like I said in that process outline, there are a number of other ways to participate. So the second set of neighborhood meetings, the Planning Commission meetings, the City Council meetings, those Planning Commission and City Council open to the public. They will have public comment periods during those meetings, and you are also able to send them emails if you'd like to communicate with them that way. But I do want to emphasize that right now, because we have not gotten to those meetings yet, we have not gotten to the Planning Commission and City Council, the way we like to compile all of your comments and questions in a way that's easy to organize is through what's called the engagement portal. And so you can get to that again by going to the TOD mapping webpage on the city website. Again, just searching TOD mapping on the city website or on a search engine. There is a link to the engagement portal. It's kind of towards the bottom of that page. That engagement portal does have a list of all the active zoning cases. So it's actually quite a few things. I think there's something like 20 or 30 cases on there. So you might have to scroll through it a little bit to find these. We will put a link to the direct link to the survey in the chat for this meeting. And we'll also put that on the webpage pretty soon. But we do want to encourage you at this point in the process, please direct your questions and comments to the engagement portal so that, because what we're going to do, we're going to take all those, we're going to put them into a report, and that is going to be presented to the Planning Commission so they have it all in one place. So that does make it easier for us and for them to have all that collected in one place instead of if everybody sends them a different email, it can be a little bit confusing. So about the engagement portal, I just want to give more detail about that. So again, you can go to the TOD mapping page, scroll to the bottom, you find the link to that, and then you'll need to scroll through all the active cases to get to one called TOD mapping Western ERT. And I imagine that some folks are here this evening because they would like to request that their property be removed from the overlay district rezoning or potentially added. And so again, in order to have those organized and gathered in an easy way for the Planning Commission and City Council to look at, we encourage you, if you do want to make that request, put it in the engagement portal. There's a place where you can put comments, put your name, the address of your property, and whether you would like for it to be added or removed. That way, putting all that information to a single comment is much easier. If you just put your name at the beginning of the survey and then put that comment without your name, it can be difficult to tie those things together, just the way the survey software works. So putting all that into one comment really makes that easy to organize. So those future meetings, if you got a letter for this meeting, you will get a letter for those future meetings. We also are going to post signs like we did for this meeting, and we'll also be using the city's email and social media outlets to spread that information. So there'll be a lot of ways for you to find out this information. And of course, you can just contact staff directly. So that's the end of the presentation. Again, here's contact information for myself and Hannah, and we'll put those in the chat as well. And I'll go ahead and take down the presentation, and we can get into your questions. And like I said at the beginning, we want to kind of try to organize the questions, at least at the outset, because there are a number of people here. So if you are here and your question is, I don't know whether my property is in the rezoning request or not, please put that in the chat. Or there are reactions that you can do through Zoom. And so there's one that's like a thumbs up. So if you are here, one of your questions is, I'm just not sure whether my property is in the rezoning area that would have the overlay applied, go ahead and put that in the chat or give us the thumbs up, and we'll walk through the viewer. Not seeing a lot of thumbs up for questions about whether a property is included. That doesn't seem to be a particular area of concern. Okay, our next area that we wanted to kind of be a focal point for questions was, if you have an existing building or use that you believe will be made non-conforming by the overlay district, and you would like to ask about that, please put that in the chat. And then we can kind of work through those. We, if there's a lot of those, we want to be able to be orderly in how we respond to them. Okay, so I'm looking in the chat. I'm not seeing. All right, and before we get to the open questions, I also want to unmute everyone so we can ask those first two questions to folks on the phone who might not be able to use the chat. So, nope, I'm seeing some chats come in. Okay, so one of the questions was, what is non-conforming? So that would basically mean if you have a business that would be prohibited by the overlay district. So again, that is things like car wash, gas station, drive-through, fast food restaurant, self-service storage, vehicle repair shops. Those types of businesses would be non-conforming, and that's something you want to work through. I see Matt is telling me he's got some questions. So before we get to the list of chat questions, sorry, I'm showing my Zoom ignorance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everyone to unmute. And this is, I do want to specifically say this is for people who are joining us by telephone. If you are joining by computer or internet connected device, please use the chat. But if you are using a telephone, I'm going to click this button that says ask to unmute. Your phone should tell you that you have the option to unmute yourself by pressing a key. And then at that point, if you want to ask about your property being in the overlay or being made non-conforming, please do so at that time. So I've just done that, asking to unmute.
I just raised my hand. This is Larry Sneed. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Sneed.
Yes, thank you.
So I would like to just take a quick moment for folks on the phone if they want to respond.
What I was gonna say is I don't see a area, or maybe I'm sure my lack of understanding of the Zoom as well, where I can put a chat in. I don't see it.
Oh, I apologize. So if you're using a computer or an internet connected device, there should be usually at the bottom of the Zoom screen, the Zoom window in most computers there. And sometimes you have to kind of scroll your mouse over the bottom to get those options to come up. there should be a button that says chat.
I'm not muted.
There may also be a set of options with a set of 3 dots that you can click on to see if there's a chat feature.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so I don't feel like I'm hearing from folks on the telephone. So let's go to the chat questions. So Matt said he's got some questions lined up. So let's.
Maybe before we get to those questions, I'm seeing some, going back to your first category of questions, someone asking, is Dutch Village?
Dutch Village. Yeah, I'm familiar with where Dutch Village is. So that's south of the Harris Teeter Shopping Center at the corner of Jones Franklin and Western Boulevard. And yes, Dutch Village is included in the proposed overlay district. And so that's actually, okay, we can walk through the Dutch Village example. I think that's a good way for us to have a real world example to talk through how the overlay would impact a piece of property. So Dutch Village is an apartment development that is condominiumized. It is at each unit has a separate ownership. And so the first thing is, being an apartment development, the overlay district allows that type of housing. So Dutch Village is not made non-conforming. So Dutch Village buildings, not only just like any other building in use, can be repaired and renovated, but in addition, by being non-conforming, by being not non-conforming, Dutch Village could have additions built, expansions to the existing buildings. Portions of it could be redeveloped with the same use, the same type of housing. And then one thing I'll note about the overlay district that we didn't talk about in the presentation is that there are 2 density bonuses in the overlay district. And so what that means is that the city of Raleigh in our zoning sets a maximum height for each mixed use district. And Dutch Village is zoned mixed use. It's zoned residential mixed use, if I remember correctly. So the maximum height of a district, let's say, for example, is 3 stories. What the overlay district says is if you have a maximum height of 3 stories, once you have the overlay district applied, you are allowed to build additional stories of height on your property in return for providing certain types of development. And so there are 2 bonuses. The first height bonus is you can have 50% more height if you provide affordable housing units. And so in the example of a 3-story zoning, the bonus rounds up. So 3 stories times 50% is 4.5, which rounds up to 5. So a 3-story zoning, you could build a 5-story building if in those additional 2 stories, 20% of the dwelling units are affordable for households earning up to 60% of the area median income and would need to remain affordable at that level for 30 years. So again, going back to the Dutch Village example, there is, the basis of the overlay district is that there is going to be additional development in the future around the bus rapid transit service. And so the thing I'll point out about Dutch Village in particular is that because it is condominiums, because there's, if I remember correctly, something like 150 different owners of all the condos in Dutch Village, that does typically reduce the likelihood of a piece of property being purchased by a developer and redeveloped. So basically, it's very difficult for a developer to convince all 150 people to sell their condo so that they could put that together into a single entity and redevelop that property. So that's a lot of detail about Dutch Village, but I think that was a useful thought exercise to walk through the impacts of this overlay. So, but with that, let's get to, but the answer is Dutch Village is included in the proposed rezoning. Matt, did you have some questions from the chat?
Yeah, I do. Start from the top. We've got several. Tammy Zhao asked, what is RX zoning? I think you mentioned that in your earlier comments.
Yeah, that's a great question. So RX means residential mixed use. And so the the way that zoning works in Raleigh, the most common zoning districts are split into two categories: residential and mixed use. And so residential districts typically just allow housing, and then mixed use districts allow some combination of housing and commercial uses. And so in the case of residential mixed use, the district allows all types, well, in a TOD context would allow townhouses and apartments. And then under normal circumstances without the overlay district, residential mixed use allows you to have a small amount of commercial space within an apartment building if that building is at the corner of two public streets. And that's basically meant to allow a little bit of commercial use to complement the housing. If you have a residential mixed use district and you apply the transit overlay district, it does expand the options for having a commercial use in an apartment building. Specifically, without the overlay district, residential mixed use sets a maximum of 4,000 square feet for that commercial space. Once the overlay is applied, you are no longer limited to 4,000 square feet. So it could basically be the whole first floor of an apartment building. The other thing that the overlay district does is you do not have to have that commercial space be at the corner of two public streets. So if a apartment building is in the middle of a block, it could also have a retail use, and that retail use could take up the whole first floor of the building. So that's what residential mixed use means.
Thanks, John. Let's go to the next question, which was the question from Wanda Gilbert Coker that says, note the asterisks on the prohibited uses slide that says may be rebuilt if damaged. Define damaged. I believe that was about 1 unit and 2 unit housing.
Yeah. So single family housing and duplexes are prohibited in the overlay district. So if you own a house and it's a single family house, or what we call it in zoning, it's detached house, and you get the overlay district applied, then that means you could not tear that house down, completely grade the site and build a brand new house. That would not be allowed. But you are completely allowed, for as long as you would like, to maintain that house, to repair it in its current form, its current footprint. You can keep that house forever, as long as you don't abandon it or vacate it. I think that the maximum period of time is 365 days. And at that point, then there would be a question of whether you could reestablish it as that use. But basically, yeah, as long as you maintain the house, you can keep a single family house. It's really about new development. And so damage means if there was a fire, if there was a tornado, there was a flood, these things happen. And so, yeah, like if there was a fire and the one wall of the house fell over, you say, well, can I rebuild my house? Absolutely. Even if you have the overlay, you could rebuild your house back to the way it was if you had a fire. So that's what that means.
All right. Thanks, John. The next question is, are there other cities utilizing BRT?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, and particularly in the Southeast, bus rapid transit is becoming very popular. So Richmond, Virginia has a successful bus rapid transit line. I myself have ridden it. It's very nice, comfortable. The platforms are, they are sophisticated. There's displays that show when the next bus is coming. So it's a great experience. And Charlotte, I think either has already started operating theirs or is still in the development of it. Charlotte's going to have a line. Atlanta, I believe, has one of these lines. I think there's a couple cities in Florida that have them. So yeah, it really is. A lot of cities are looking at bus rapid transit as an alternative to light rail. And some people might remember that Raleigh and Wake County and Durham County went pretty far along in a light rail planning process. Durham County went very far along. And what Raleigh and Wake County decided was the expense of developing light rail compared to the benefit. You got pretty much all the same benefits from bus rapid transit, and the cost is something like a tenth I mean, it's so much less expensive to use buses. And so, yeah, bus rapid transit is really catching on, and there's examples of it being very successful.
I'm gonna jump ahead and thanks, John. I'll also add that I've ridden the BRT in Richmond and had a very positive experience. Reliable, on time, and frequent, just like what Raleigh will have in the near future. There was a follow-up question to the damage question to single family or duplex housing. So it's still confusing on damaged. If a tornado leveled it, clearly I wouldn't be able to rebuild exactly the same house, but I may want to build a single family home again.
That is a fairly specific question, so I'm going to pull up the actual language of the ordinance just to make sure I'm getting this correct. Okay. So the exact wording of the code is that replacement is allowed. Replacement of a building and a non-conforming structure is allowed in the overlay district. So that means, yes, if the building was completely demolished, but you built a new house, again, that's in the same footprint. So basically the same area of the foundation, you put a new house that's, basically the same size, same form of house, then that is totally legal. But yeah, if the house is totally demolished and it was, say, a 1,200 square foot house, and you come to the city and say, well, now, this seems like a good time for me to build a 3,000 square foot house that takes up more of the lot, that's the overlay district is pretty much going to prohibit that. And you're going to have to go to the Board of Adjustment and ask them if you can do that and get a special use permit.
Okay, thanks, John. Let's see. All right, this question is from Mike Whitmer, and he asked, how will the new 2-story requirement and height limits affect unit density of existing zoning? Asking specifically about a townhouse unit that is on a dead end in the back of a single family neighborhood.
So the allowed density is not set by the building. I guess is that question referring to the minimum height of 2 stories or the height bonus of 2 stories for a 3-story district? Both. Okay. So the minimum height does not impact the amount of development that's allowed on a piece of property. So let's walk through an example of that. So if I had a 1 acre lot and I have, and let's say zoned residential mixed use already, and residential mixed use with a 3-story height maximum, and then the overlay is applied. If I'm not willing to provide any affordable housing units, I can't build anything extra on that site. I'm still limited to 3 stories of height and the same setbacks as the regular residential mixed use district. So really, if it's a mixed use district, the amount of housing units doesn't really change with the overlay unless you're providing affordable housing. So let's imagine that same scenario. Somebody says, well, I have a 3-story RX district. I want to build a 5-story building, and I'm willing to have 20% of those additional units be affordable at 60% of AMI. In that case, yes, you can have more density. And so on that 1 acre, typical build out for RX tends to be somewhere around 30 units per acre for a 3-story height. So, potentially you go from 30 units on an acre to potentially almost 50. There's a lot of development details that would impact that. Stormwater, of course, would come into play. Parking, although the overlay district doesn't require parking. Many people choose to provide parking regardless, even if it's not required. But that's basically how it works. And then we can walk through an example of, and also the minimum height of 2 stories. That doesn't change how many housing units you can build. The number of housing units you can build is set by whatever the zoning, the zoning district says, not by the minimum height. If you have a residential lot, so let's say it's residential 10, and then you have the overlay applied. So in residential 10, the maximum height is 3 stories, and the maximum density, depending on which building type you choose, but let's say an apartment building type, can be around, I think, 12 to 14 units per acre. Then if you have the overlay applied to that same acre of residential 10, you are now allowed to build that site as if it was zoned residential mixed use and up to 4 stories of height and 60 feet of height. So you would have additional housing units that you could build there. And that would probably be more than doubling in that situation.
Okay, we'll go on to the next question from Carol McGarren that says, do we anticipate easement changes for properties adjacent to Western? And I think that could also be interpreted as right-of-way. Will the street area need to be made bigger? Carol, is that the question that you're asking?
So there is, yeah, it's very likely, almost certain that during the engineering and the engineering design of the Western Boulevard BRT service, that there will be locations along Western Boulevard where the city and Go Triangle, as far, in order to construct that service, will need to acquire private property. And so the term that was used was easement. There are probably going to be locations where that property has to be purchased outright. And so the way that works is the agency that's going to be managing that project would come to the property owner with what's considered a fair market value offer. So they would say, we've done an engineering design of this corridor. We think that it's going to require, let's say, for example, an additional 5 feet of right-of-way off the front of your property. We believe your property is worth X number of dollars per acre, multiplied by the length of your frontage, by the depth that we would like to acquire. We can offer you this amount of money. And the property owner can accept that amount of money. There are also means by which the property owner can basically appeal that valuation and propose a substitute valuation. That is something that does happen. But yes, I mean, the United States Constitution and all laws that derive from it, state law, local law, all require compensation for any property that's used for public purposes.
All right, let's see. Mateo asked, why weren't BRT lanes included in the Western Boulevard interchange redesign?
I don't know the answer to that question. Danya Sandeep is here. She, I think, has been working more closely with the BRT corridor design. So she might be able to provide a little bit of insight into that. My general guess is just going to be that NCDOT had the money and the project was ready and they didn't want to wait for BRT to be ready. But Tanya might have other information. Thanks. So not hearing from Tanya. So that's, I would say.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
I wasn't able to unmute myself. So
Sorry, Tanya.
so I assume you're talking about the I-440 interchange. So there again, I think John's right. That project was well ahead of our BRT project, approval and funding. So while we had let them know that the BRT is on the way and, Wake County Transit Plan was on, that they were still ahead and their timeline and funding was moving forward. So there was some level of coordination, obviously, that happened at regional level, but that was the reason why we could not have the ability to, time it because BRT was just following that. But having said that, I think the transportation team and the BRT team, they are closely looking to find a way to integrate and enhance pedestrian bicycle connectivity across that challenging intersection. And I do want to alert folks that we have the design phase of the BRT project that's ongoing now, that's led by the city's transit division. We have a web page with more information on that. So I saw some questions on the station locations and some of the cross sections. So all of those would be confirmed by that design phase, and that's ongoing. So you do want to pay attention. So as you said, some of your questions about how BRT would weave into some of these challenging intersections will be analyzed through that process. So we will see cross sections, and it may change from where, different segments based on the constraints and limitations. You might see that some sections may have dedicated bus lanes, whereas the other ones where you're challenged with right away, you would probably have mixed traffic, for a certain, and I assume that might be the case for the interchange right there. But we can post or share information about that design phase because some of the station locations and all of those cross section on how BRT would fit into the corridor would really be coming out of that process.
All right. Thanks, Tanya. I think, Tanya, you might have just answered this question as well from Carol McGarren. How would we know where the platform bus stops will be? I think you just covered that.
Okay, yeah. So if you look at the station locations, again, we have a very preliminary draft that came out of the MIS Wake County study. So we have some proposed locations, but what, again, I want to reiterate is that those locations will be confirmed by the design phase. So if you keep track and try to tune in, we will know where the station locations would confirm, and then the exact location of the station platform would be finalized by that process. So we are happy to share the link for that. I know it's just 10% design, so they're not proceed a whole lot, but there's information and we will know that soon. So we don't know that for sure now at this moment because that process just kicked off and is still on the way. So we'll have more details on the next couple of months or more.
Thanks.
So I think I would like to interrupt, Matt, your series of questions. Thank you so much for moderating. It's really helpful. I'm seeing a lot, I'm kind of scrolling through the chat here, and I'm seeing a lot of questions about two kind of related topics, which are residential displacement and Heritage Park. And I think that's why a lot of folks are here this evening. I don't want you to feel like we are avoiding those questions. And so I think it's appropriate for us to, let's go ahead and talk about that. I think if we want to have that conversation, this is our venue to do it. So we do have Wayne Felton here from the Raleigh Housing Authority. And so before, I do want to ask him to talk a little bit about what the Housing Authority's plans are for Heritage Park in the future. But I also want to just make a couple of general notes about the overlay district and about planning in Raleigh in general. So I think we're all aware that Raleigh is growing quickly, and Raleigh is a high demand metro area across the country with a lot of new jobs coming in, high paying jobs, and a lot of people coming from other parts of the country that are have more expensive housing markets and who have high incomes coming to Raleigh and looking for housing. And so that does create impacts, short-term impacts of housing costs going up and people who have lived in Raleigh for a long time basically being priced out of neighborhoods where they have a strong connection and roots. And that, no one's happy about that. No one wants that to happen. And that's really difficult for everyone in Raleigh. And so, but as planners, we have to look at the options that are available to us as a city and a community. And so we know that the demand is there and it's going to continue to be developing. And so one of the things we want to do with this overlay district is be proactive about encouraging development that includes affordable housing units. And again, in the short term, that is not very satisfying for many people to hear, well, the number of housing units and the overall cost of housing units, is likely to ease up over time. Well, if you're having to move out of your home, that doesn't make you feel any better. But that is the way that we as long-range planners have to think about it, is that we have to think about how are we going to have the supply of housing in the Raleigh market keep up with the demand. And if we don't do that, the problem's only going to get worse. And then how do we make sure that the new supply of housing includes units that are affordable to a wide range of incomes? And we are also doing that both through this overlay district, but also through a number of programs through the city's Housing and Neighborhoods Department that are subsidizing the development of new affordable housing through nonprofit and private developers, and also assisting existing residents with repair of their homes and assisting low-income households with purchasing homes. We do have a down payment assistance program at the city. So I just want to make those general notes about displacement and the city's general perspective about how we are dealing with the housing demand. And at that point, I do want to ask Wayne if he is available to say a few words about what the long-term goals are for Heritage Park. Oh, and do we need to unmute him? Sorry.
Yes. Okay. Hey, thank you, John. So regarding Heritage Park, we are looking to continue to have affordable housing at Heritage Park. And one of the design principles that our board has approved is we want to have at least 122 units at the redeveloped Heritage Park that are available to families making 0 to 30% of the area median income. That's one of the design principles that our board wants to ensure that, and 122 comes from the existing number of public housing units at Heritage Park. We're also, we're engaging with P3 to assist us with our communications with our residents and with the community at Heritage Park. We've also engaged with EJP to help us with the overall master development process. And we're currently going through the process of selecting a co-developer for Heritage Park. And we're looking to complete that process in February. And then once we're completed with that, we're going to have a substantial residential and community engagement program, which includes the city and city council as well.
All right, thank you so much, Wayne. That's really helpful. Yeah, so I kind of want to reiterate Wayne's message that the Heritage Park property is fully intended to remain affordable housing for the foreseeable future. And the bus rapid transit planning, the transit overlay district mapping have no intention of changing that property from being affordable housing. And we actually think could potentially be a benefit because obviously that property would qualify for the height bonus for affordable housing. So that gives the Raleigh Housing Authority additional options if they wanted to build more affordable housing units on the same piece of land. This overlay district gives them that capability to actually provide more housing units available to low-income households than they could without the overlay district. Okay, so Matt, we can return to the question.
Yeah, thanks. There are several more. Let's see. A question about the rezoning portal from Leon Cook. Can you make it easier to access? It is cumbersome today. Thank you for that note. John, you want to say anything specifically about that?
Yeah, we'll make a note that we're going to be doing an update to the webpage for this project in the next week or so. And so what we'll do is we'll have the link to the engagement directly to the specific surveys for this mapping process. We'll link those from that webpage. So it'll be, you can just jump straight from the webpage to the survey that you want to respond to.
All right. I see a question from Camille Bishop. It says the TOD overlay district backs up to the fence of my townhome community. Currently, it is zoned mixed use industrial light. How do we know what will be built there?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat that say things like, does this mean somebody's going to come and change where I live or change something? The thing I want to emphasize about those questions is the city applies the zoning. This overlay district is zoning, and that's a regulation. It's the city setting the boundaries for what can be built, what types of businesses can be located on a piece of property, what types of buildings can be built on that piece of property. The city is not, other than building the BRT stations and improving the streets to serve, to build the BRT route, the city is not conducting any development through the bus rapid transit or TOD mapping processes. So we are not, we don't have any role in private development of private property. So there is, like I said, we expect, because of the BRT service, there to be additional interest in development along these corridors, because we think that people will want to live in areas where they can easily take a high quality bus to employment centers like downtown, like Cary, like Garner, like NC State University. And so again, we want to be proactive and say, how can the city set up the zoning so that if we feel confident that there is going to be demand for new development, that development is not just serving the private developer, the owner of that private property, but that development is doing more to serve residents, bus users, the people who are using that surrounding area, workers, that they are getting the benefit of the public improvements that come along with that development. That's what we want to try to ensure with this overlay district. So as far as this industrial mixed use property next to a townhouse development, we really can't say what that property owner wants to do with their property in the future. They might want to keep it the way it is. They might take an interest in doing something different with it because of the DRT service. What we can say about the overlay district is that some of the uses that are less compatible with townhouses would be prohibited by the overlay, right? So car washes are pretty loud. Gas stations can have odors and also noise, and traffic. Drive-throughs have traffic, right? So those things would be prohibited by the overlay. So in that sense, some might consider that the overlay being applied next to your neighborhood produces a better set of possible development options in terms of commercial development.
All right, thanks, John. A specific question about, can you provide more information regarding outside storage, as noted on the not allowed slide?
Yeah, so outdoor storage refers to the storage of products, materials, equipment, vehicles, and that either can be a standalone use, but in a lot of cases is associated with a business. So for example, I might have an equipment rental company and I store my equipment on a lot next to my office. I have a building with the office where I, do the rental agreements and meet with customers. And then I have the lot where the equipment actually sits and they pick it up. Or might be a tow yard, right? A tow truck, has a yard where they tow vehicles. It could be a wholesale supplier that sells something like construction supplies, like marble and stone, and they have a lot where they display those products and they store them outdoors. Those things would not be allowed in the overlay district because those things, while those things are important parts of the economy, absolutely. And I'm not going to say those businesses are essential. We have a lot of development in Raleigh, and we have a lot of different parts of our economic sectors that need to use those things. But what we're saying with this overlay district is there are other places where those things fit better than right next to this big public investment in high quality transit service. And so those things would be prohibited. And again, if you have one of those uses today, you can keep it. As long as you keep operating it, you can keep it. And in fact, the overlay district extends the period of vacating the use after which you can reestablish it. So under normal circumstances, if you have a non-conforming use and you stop operating that use, you have 365 days to resume operating, or else it becomes completely illegal and you cannot reestablish it. In the overlay district, if you stop operating that use, you have 2 years before you can come back and you could reestablish it. So we have tried to be very generous to say, not generous, but to be thoughtful about, if you have an existing use, we are not trying to say you need to go away. What we're saying is if in the future you decide that it's in your best interest to redevelop your property for something else, we think there is a set of uses that is more appropriate to transit service.
Thank you, John. This question, I believe, is from Carol as well. Carol McGarren. Oh, hang on one second. Would we anticipate less car traffic on Western? Would we anticipate better walking facilitated? Would we anticipate impact on property values?
Mhm. Vehicle traffic is always a tricky topic. So, there's been a lot of research over the years to try to test this question. If you put in higher capacity transit, do people stop driving as much? And I'm going to be very frank. In a lot of circumstances, you don't actually see very much of a reduction in traffic. And that's because of a phenomenon that's called induced demand. And so this is how it works. You have a certain set of people today that choose to drive down Western Boulevard to commute to work and back home. And there's a limit, right? Once the traffic congestion reaches a certain point, some people are going to say, well, I'm just going to go a different way. I'll take I-40, I'll take Tryon Road, I'll take 440, I'll find another way, I'll take Wade Avenue. I'm going to avoid Western because it's just so congested. So there's a limit to the number of people that are going to try to take Western. Now you add bus rapid transit. So let's say 5% of those people are in a position where they can walk to the transit stop and get to their job from the other transit stop. And so 5% of people say, okay, now that I can ride bus rapid transit, I'm not going to drive anymore to get to work and back home. Well, what just happened? Now you have 5% more capacity on Western Boulevard. And those people that had previously been saying, I'm going to avoid Western Boulevard and take one of those alternate routes, suddenly Western Boulevard starts looking better again. So do vehicle trips go down? Not necessarily because of this induced demand issue, but the key is we are offering more options and options that don't cost as much, right? So what the transit service can do is that person who the prospect of renting an apartment and owning a vehicle is unaffordable for them. But renting an apartment and riding the bus rapid transit, suddenly that living situation becomes affordable. The bus rapid transit changed that person's outlook, changed that person's picture of where they can decide to live and how they can get to work. The person who is choosing whether or not to drive a vehicle, again, they're going to be facing that induced demand situation. Is it going to be more comfortable for pedestrians? The answer to that is over time, yes. And there's a few reasons for that. The first thing is the transit overlay district requires that new development in mixed use districts comply with what's called the urban limited frontage, or if it already has a frontage, whatever frontage it already has. And so what a frontage does is it says you can't put parking in between the building and the street. You have to put the parking either behind the building or in a parking structure. And then the building has to be closer to the street, and you have to have pedestrian entrances along the street. You have to have a nicer sidewalk along the street. So a typical sidewalk in Raleigh is 6 feet. The frontages require either an 8-foot or a 10-foot sidewalk. There has to be a certain amount of transparency in the building. So these types of things basically make it so that the space between a building and the street, in a current development where you might have a shopping center with, a parking lot that's 150, 200 feet wide, and then the street. Well, if I get off the bus at the street and I have to walk through that parking lot, and there's usually no sidewalks through the parking lot, and not even any painted stripes to show where pedestrians could go. I'm having to walk between cars, walk between parking spaces. By saying when there's new development, that building's got to be close to the street and has to have a wide sidewalk and has to have pedestrian entrances along the street, that zoning is basically saying as development occurs over time, these streets will become more pedestrian-oriented streets and less vehicle-oriented streets. And then property values. So city staff, as planners, we do not really try to analyze impacts on property value. That's really our charge as planners. What our role and what we're supposed to do is to think about quality of life, access to facilities and services, and the sufficiency of infrastructure. So basically are the things that the government, city government is providing, and the ways that people use and move around their community and their neighborhood, serving them well. Our role is not really to say there should be some ideal property valuation for some property, whether that's high or low. That's really not the way that we approach planning discussions. That being said, in some instances, property values go up when property is close to a bus rapid transit service. That can happen.
Thanks, John. There are a ton of questions in the chat. We're going to try to get through as many of them as we can tonight. But to triage some of these questions, I'm going to ask a few that are specific to the rezoning petition and the process. So I'm going to skip ahead a few questions to a question from Thomas McKinney. It says, how does public input affect the city council decision if there is a conflict?
Yeah. So to start with, the city council will make the final decision whether to approve or deny this zoning request. And, just to be candid about it, the city council is very motivated to have bus rapid transit, excuse me, be successful. And so I feel very confident that the city council is going to approve some amount of this overlay on these two corridors. So, but that is they could deny it. I mean, that's their choice. And so then the secondary question is, well, which properties are included in the overlay district? And so that is part of the planning commission review and the city council review. Is you as property owners, as residents, as stakeholders in the community, you have the ability to advocate to the planning commission and to the city council and say, we think that this property either should be added or should be removed for the following reasons. And then they will weigh those reasons. And the way it works procedurally is the planning commission will receive this case. And so let's say, for instance, they make a recommendation to approve this rezoning at the planning commission. The planning commission could also say, we recommend that this be approved, and we also recommend that X, Y, and Z property be taken out and A, B, and C property be added in because we heard from those property owners or residents and they gave us these reasons and we agree with those reasons. And then at that point, it is still a recommendation from the planning commission. And again, the final say is the city council. And so the city council, in their final decision, will say, we vote as a city council. Again, imagining hypothetically, they say we vote to approve. And then they can say, as our approval includes with X, Y, and Z property removed and A, B, and C property added in. So the city council has a final decision. What level of input do you have? That's why we have this public facing process. And that's why, you have the ability to communicate with planning commission and city council, and they can communicate back with you and say either, yeah, we find that reason compelling, or they can say, I'm not so sure, can you give me more information? And that's why I said, planning commission is probably not going to take action in a single meeting. They'll hold it for a couple meetings, and city council, I think, is probably going to do the same thing, is hold it for, they're probably not going to take action in a first meeting. I can't make any promises, they make their own decisions, but I think they'll likely want to look at it and hear from the public. And then, that's where that conversation plays out.
All right, thanks, John. Related, a question from Jane Finn. What is the estimated timeline for the process to reach city council for decision? Looking for a number of months or years?
Yep. So it's the most direct answer, probably somewhere in the realm of 6 months. And so, our next step is submitting the application. Like I said, that'll be in the next few weeks. We need to gather, all these comments together. So we'll submit the application. We'll have another round of these meetings. These meetings do take a little bit of time for us to organize, all of our logistics set up. So, I could see I'm just going to lay out a very hypothetical. Sometimes, but these things tend to get drawn out because we want to hear more from the community. But hypothetically, we submit the application sometime early in February. We have a second set of neighborhood meetings in March, and then it could be in front of the Planning Commission. They'll probably send it to one of their committees, and the committees don't meet as often as their regular meetings. So potentially go to a committee meeting in April or May, and then get to the city council by about June. And I think, council takes a break in July. So it's a pretty, I think it's a up in the air question right now. Could this be at city council for a decision prior to their summer break? There's a pretty decent chance it might push to August after their break. So probably late summer, I would say, is a good, reasonable expectation for this process to be complete.
Thanks. This was a question from Shaib, who asked, can you define what affordable housing means? And I think in the context of the question is, what is the affordable housing requirement and the TOD bonus? Probably the best place to start answering that question.
Yeah, so the height bonus in the overlay district, you can make use of that height bonus if you provide a certain number of affordable units, and those affordable units have to be affordable for households earning up to 60% of the area median income. And it has to remain affordable at that rate for 30 years. So 60% of the area median income is the measure of affordability that we're using for the overlay district. Now, there are many other contexts where there are different levels of affordability. So, for example, federal low-income housing tax credits have a variety of different income levels for how you can meet the requirements for those tax credits. So there's different definitions, but for the overlay district, 60% of area median income.
Thank you. Let's see. What controls are there on possible businesses added within the TOD? Tattoo parlors, vape shops. I guess just looking for a comprehensive list of permitted and prohibited districts in the TOD.
Right. So all the language of the overlay district is available right now. It's in the city zoning code. So if you go in the city website and search Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO, you can find that. It is in section 5.5.1, and it's actually one of the more decipherable parts of the zoning code, I'll be honest. But yeah, so there is a set of uses that are prohibited in the overlay district that are listed right out in that section of UDO. Now, the uses that are allowed in the zoning district are set by whatever district applies to that particular piece of property, and that's going to depend. And I'll walk through the mixed use districts because that's probably where this question is going. Residential districts pretty much only allow residential housing uses and civic uses like churches and schools. So that's the residential districts. Anything that starts with R hyphen is like that. The mixed use districts basically go from least intense commercial uses to most intense commercial uses in this order: residential mixed use, office mixed use, neighborhood mixed use, commercial mixed use, and then finally industrial mixed use. So, for example, residential mixed use allows commercial uses. So a vape shop is going to be considered a retail use under the city zoning. And so retail is allowed in all of the mixed use districts, RX, OX, NX, and CX. The difference is how much of a building can be composed of that use, or does there have to be some other use in that building? And so, but what the overlay district does is it offers basically a little bit of an expansion of that. And so I'm getting a little bit kind of a roundabout way of explaining this because it's a little bit complicated. But basically, residential mixed use allows retail, which would include a vape shop. It allows personal service, which would include a tattoo parlor. And those things would have to be, though, in an apartment building type. And so that basically means there would have to be residential units in the building. And then the other districts allow those things as well. The difference is, does there have to be something else in the building? So in neighborhood mixed use and commercial mixed use, you can have retail or personal service uses by themselves. Now, the key thing about the transit overlay district is there's a minimum height of 2 stories. So that means somebody building it's no longer possible for someone to build a new single-story retail shop in any of those districts if the overlay is applied. So yeah, you might have a vape shop or a tattoo parlor in, say, an OX district or an NX district, but then there would have to be something else in the building, right? There would be offices on the second floor, apartments on the second floor. And so that's kind of the goal here, is that that wherever there are retail uses, commercial uses like that, we also want to see the housing and the employment type uses, offices, that are going to support the transit ridership. And also, just kind of from a bigger picture concept, make the area more, fully fledged in the sense of having the complete set of uses that make a healthy urban area. Strip shopping areas, which, small businesses are great and it's super important part of a local economy, but strip shopping by itself is not a robust local development pattern. You really need the mix of uses to have a high quality urban area.
I'm going through my questions that I have. I think that's everything specific to the zoning. Here's a question. Can you sell a single family home if it's in the overlay?
Yep, because that you're continuing the use and you're continuing the structure, so you're not vacating those things.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, and so I guess I'll just add to that. Non-conformity in that case is not tied to ownership. So long as the use is continued, doesn't matter who lives there. This is a question from June. I'm on Greenleaf Street. I see my right and left neighbor are in, but I'm not. How should I join?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, Greenleaf is a pretty interesting situation. That's between Gorman and Kent over there south of Western Boulevard. And what ended up happening with Greenleaf is because of the way we set up the criteria for applying the TOD, it was residentially zoned properties of a certain size would be included. And so some of those lots on Greenleaf are meeting that size requirement and others are not. And we have heard from a couple owners on Greenleaf that they would be interested in having their property be included in the overlay. And so, what we would say is we're going to be collecting that information. So we talked about the engagement portal. Like I said before, what we really want you to do is go to the engagement portal, go in and in one comment, put your name, your address, and would you like to be added or removed? And we're going to capture all that in a report for the Planning Commission. And that way we can have that conversation all at once and basically just walk through those and say, does it make sense to have this come in? Does it make sense to have that go out? And we'll have that conversation with the Planning Commission.
Okay, thanks, John. I'm going to go back to our list. How do you know there will not be increased parking on nearby residential streets due to these new businesses?
Candidly, we don't know that. That is that people can park on the street in a lot of places in Raleigh. We think of that as a public benefit. And so, but yeah, there's a question of, well, when is there so much demand that it's impactful to residents? That residents aren't able to park on the street if that's where they typically park. And so there's a couple things that I want to point out about that. The overlay district does not require parking for pretty much any use at all. There's no parking required in the overlay district, the transit overlay district. That allowance of no parking is likely to be replaced pretty soon by a separate piece of code that's being proposed through a text change called TC-11-21. That was just reported out of the Planning Commission. Sorry, it's still at the Planning Commission. Planning Commission will have the option to report it to the City Council at their meeting next week. And then the City Council is likely to schedule a public hearing for it probably in March. So that TC-11-21 would remove all parking minimums for all uses in all zoning districts, just about in Raleigh. So while that is part of the overlay district, it's also likely to be part of all of Raleigh pretty soon. And so that's how the zoning is going to be working, likely pretty soon. And so then from a practical perspective, the way we look at that is, first of all, the more people that can live near this transit service and get to them, back and forth to their job, but also this is really the key thing about the minimum height of 2 stories, about giving a height bonus, about encouraging commercial uses, is that over time, the goal is that the areas along these bus rapid transit corridors become full service areas. So I might live on Western Boulevard. I might take the bus to my job downtown or in Cary or at NC State. And then when I get home, what the long-term goal is, because of the ability to develop this mix of uses, is that when I get off the bus near my house, there is a dry cleaner right there. There is a restaurant right there. All those things that I would typically drive somewhere else, I don't have to anymore. And then maybe I don't own 2 cars per household. Maybe I don't own 1 car per household. That's the thought process. And then even without parking minimums, many private developers are still going to provide parking. And that's what we have found in downtown Raleigh. So parking minimums have not been required in downtown Raleigh, in the downtown mixed use district, which covers most of downtown, for I think almost a year now. And there's a building that's just completed construction downtown that is 19 stories tall and has 8 stories of parking. And they could have, in my understanding, could probably have not provided any parking in that building. They chose to provide 8 stories of parking deck in a 19-story building. So I think that's pretty strong evidence that the city doesn't need to be forcing that. And one of the major benefits of not forcing the developer to provide parking and let them determine that based on their own economic desire for their tenants, their future users of their development, is that can help housing affordability, right? So if I rent an apartment and the developer built my apartment with a dedicated parking space, my rental rate has to include the cost of paying for that parking space. So what not requiring parking allows a developer to do is separate those 2 costs from one another. A developer could say, well, I want to provide housing without parking, and a person who doesn't want parking can then only pay for the housing and not have to pay for a parking space. And so, that's an affordability benefit. The goal in the long term is that the demand for parking will go down. And I do appreciate the thought that, well, there might be some short-term impact where there is additional parking demand on neighborhood streets. And so in that respect, I will note that the city does have a parking program, a parking management program. And so if that does become really a big issue, I would encourage you to contact them and talk about what the options are for, parking controls on the street. And those parking controls do have to be approved by city council. That's a city council process. But that is also an avenue for approaching those issues.
All right. Thanks, John. We've been doing a lot of talking. We're going to shift gears. We've had a participant with their hand up for a while to ask their question. Wanda Gilbert Coker has also asked several questions in the chat that we've responded to. But Wanda, I'm going to unmute you now and you can ask your question.
Yes, I heard Wayne Felton's response. And we have been working with the tenants out in Heritage Park. But the response was that they're going to rebuild 120 units. But if you all are planning a highway to come through to knock down 2 buildings, if those 2 buildings are gone, that means the other units would have to be built somewhere else. And the tenants out there are saying they do not want the units torn down. They just want them rehabilitated. So I don't think you all are hearing from what the residents want versus what Raleigh Housing Authority is telling you, telling Wayne Felton. So what I think City of Raleigh or planning or whomever needs to hear actually from the residents instead of hearing what Wayne Felton and such are telling you all. And my question is, have you gone to Heritage Park and heard from the residents? Because one, they don't have access to Zoom and all these social media tools to get on. And have you gone to Kentwood and heard from them at Raleigh Housing Authority, both the Raleigh Housing Authority, because the same way you can't reach them the same way you're reaching those. We're privileged to be on here. This is a privileged thing to be on here tonight. Everybody does not have that privilege. You're going to have to reach them another way, planning department. And so have you gone out there to find out from them, a paper survey or some way, what their thoughts are? Because many of them don't even know it's happening, what their thoughts are, because you can't listen to Wayne. Wayne don't speak for them. And that's my question. What have you done to make sure they know what is going on and to hear from them? Planning department.
So I will say in the previous round of meetings for this process, we had an in-person period of office, what we called office hours at the Walnut Terrace Community Center on the south side of south side of Martin Luther King Boulevard. And we posted signs directly in front of Heritage Park to advertise that set of meetings. And our phone numbers have been posted on the materials for this process. So we do want to reach people in ways other than ways that require internet access. I do want to respond to the comment about, well, the first thing I want to say is, I think we're talking about 2 separate topics right now. So the city is initiating a rezoning process to apply an overlay district. That overlay district does not compel or force the housing authority to do anything different with the Heritage Park property. They already have a plan that is in progress for how they want to use that property in the future to provide additional opportunities for affordable housing in a way that is, the least disruptive to the existing residents as possible. And I think the way that they intend to do that is by phasing that development to basically build additional density in one portion of that property and allow the existing residents to then move into that additional housing capacity and then proceed through the other phases of the property. So that my understanding is that they do not intend to redevelop the entire property at the same time. The other thing I want to notice about the street connection that's shown in the Western Boulevard corridor plan passing through that property. That street is on what is supposed to be on what's called the street plan map. And that's one of the city's policy maps in our comprehensive plan. That street would be constructed if the site is redeveloped. And so again, the way I envision that happening, and Wayne can correct me if this is incorrect, is that as part of that phased redevelopment of Heritage Park, they would construct those new streets as they go through each of those phases. But those streets being shown on the city street plan map does not mean that the city is going to come in at some point and just bulldoze through a street. If those streets get constructed as part of a development process. And I see Wayne might want to make a comment about that.
Yes, you're correct, John. What we had discussed with the city in our meeting back in June and with residents is that we are looking to phase the redevelopment to minimize any displacement of residents. We've also have other choices for residents. They can stay at Heritage Park during the redevelopment. They can move to other public housing of their choice if that's what they so choose, or they can elect to get a Section 8 voucher and relocate using the voucher. And they can even port with the voucher to other cities. It's really up to the families and to what their needs are. And as I stated before, we are looking to, we're going through the process to select a co-developer, and we hope to have that complete in February. And then once we do that, we're going to have a substantial resident and community outreach engagement process, which will include the city and city officials. And we're looking forward to starting that once we get our co-developer on board.
Thank you, Wayne.
I see Wanda's hand is still up. I don't know if you have an additional question you would like to ask, but I will also invite others if they would like to ask a question to raise your hand, and we can unmute you and you can ask your question if you don't want to type it in the chat. All right, I see DeQuanta. I'm going to ask you to unmute and you can ask your question.
Yes, so my question is, what is your perspective of the benefit of the people that's going to be displaced? Because so often we're reconstructing our city as though we're a big city. But the people that are being displaced does not have the affordability to come back into the areas. So what is that not being considered? The city is running out of places to move people to. You know, we can give them vouchers, as Wayne just said, but they don't meet the criteria for a lot of those. Income, a lot of different factors plays into that. And as as Raleigh is building up to become this big metropolitan city, the people are the ones that's losing, but it's the new people that are moving to our city that's benefiting from all the upbuilding and the changes that's being implemented.
Yeah. So I want to approach that through two different lenses. So I want to approach that question through sort of a, what I'll call a higher low income household example, and then a lower low income household example. So for a higher low income household, I think the perspective is that there are going to be short-term impacts that frankly are difficult to avoid. Just that private property is just that, privately owned, and private property owners have rights that the city cannot curtail. The city cannot tell someone you must use the property in a way we say. You must allow someone to continue living somewhere, and you must offer your property for rent for a certain amount of money. And so we have to think about the long-term perspective of if our only goal is to prevent new development, we're going to make the problem worse. Because what that would do is make it so that the supply of housing would not nearly keep up with the demand for housing. And so from a long-term perspective, we do want to think about, as the supply keeps up with demand over the long term, then the increase in the cost of housing that rate of increase should slow down, right? It's going up quickly now. The only way to slow it down is to have the supply catch up to the demand. And I know when you look in the short term, you say, well, they keep building more things, but somehow it's still, the prices are still going up. When does it work? You know, when does the housing cost? And the honest truth is, it's not necessarily that the housing costs are going to go down. It's that the rate of increase slows down, and people's incomes maybe can catch up. But we've got to try to keep up. So that's the step one part. The second part is about displacement and low, you know, people at in what I call the low income. And so, right, if someone is, you know, so for the first type of household I talked about, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of situations, the answer for them is to relocate to a neighborhood that's a little bit more affordable. And that might mean being farther from downtown, and it might mean being in, you know, apartments or townhouses that are a little bit older. That, you know, the things we call naturally occurring affordable housing. And yeah, that is really difficult. It does disrupt communities, and there are cultural and historic aspects of those communities that you can't relocate. I acknowledge that. That is absolutely true. And we want to help preserve that history and that culture. And we do have to, you know, the city has programs. We have a museum. We have historic districts. We have, you know, landmarks, the things we do want to preserve that history. So yeah, it's difficult. Now, in terms of a lower low income household, then you say, well, if someone's displaced, there isn't necessarily a naturally occurring affordable housing or a different affordable housing situation that makes sense for them. What do they do? And that I'm going to point to the programs that the Housing and Neighborhood Department at the City of Raleigh has, which are going to be funded by the Penny for Affordable Housing, which generates about $5 million per year of revenue out of property taxes that is dedicated to producing new affordable housing units at a target rate of 500 plus units per year. And then the $80 million affordable housing bond that was approved by voters. Gosh, I guess that was last year, 2021. That $80 million will go to producing new affordable housing units. And I know that this has been an area of much debate during the development of the bond package and since the passage of the bond, how much of that goes to very low income residents. And yeah, that's an important debate. That's an important conversation that we need to have as a community. What is the best way to allocate that funding? Us as planners in this meeting tonight for this topic of the overlay remapping, we are not in the role to help make the decision about how much of that money goes to what income levels of housing. So those are valuable conversations. We need to be having those conversations. Housing and Neighborhoods and the City Council are having those conversations. This meeting is not the place for that conversation.
We still have two hands up. I will ask to unmute Wanda again, and you can ask your next question.
I just want to quickly say that you are invited. Aisha is the president. She's on the phone of the Heritage Park Council out there. Of course, we're with Wake County Housing Justice Coalition, and they have a space out there. They have a community center where you can actually go out there and speak to the residents instead of going to another site where they have to, worry about their kids and so forth and so on, where you can go there and speak to the residents. So if you planning department, Jason and such would like to arrange that, we will most be happy to arrange that, and where you all can have that conversation one-on-one with the residents and get some better understanding. I think that would be better now. So
okay, yeah, I think we would be very happy to set up a time to talk with Heritage Park residents. I do want to be clear, though, that this group of city staff, if we organize that conversation, our goal would be to talk about the zoning, the overlay district, and that
right.
we would not really be prepared to talk about redevelopment of Heritage Park or overall housing goals and strategies for the city. Okay, just want to make absolutely.
That's the clarity they need. Many don't even know what overlay is. don't even know what you all are coming in there doing. There's a lot of confusion, and that is exactly what the community needs. So yes, please come and help clarify you all's role, so we know when we're having these conversations with Raleigh Housing Authority, when they say city, they're not talking about you all. And when you all say Raleigh Housing Authority, we know exactly what they're doing, and when we having conversations with them. So
Okay.
please,
Well,
thank
thank you
you.
for the invitation, and we will
Yes.
organize that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilbert Coker. I'm also going to unmute Ms. Copeland again. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. So I do understand that this is not the place for the income conversation, but within your planning committee, knowing that the housing affordability is a bigger problem than having affordable housing, then is that not a conversation that we should wait on certain projects to take place until we tackle the major issues at hand? Is that not something, can this not be delayed until we focus on what is at hand? Because right now in our city, a bus route or having more buses running more rapidly, or rezoning, or not being able to sell or build or reconstruct your house or do any of those are not the important factors for the people in the city. So I understand that may be a focus point on you guys as the planning committee, but that's not what the people needs right now. Like, our city is hurting, and they're having to worry about a rezone, a redistricting, what could be there, what could not be there, what could be rebuilt, what could not be. We have bigger issues. So I'm just asking, like, for you all, I'm not saying that it's a bad idea ever. I'm just saying to implement this right now when we need so much more to take place in our city. Is that not ever a conversation at the table?
Yeah, there are two reasons why I think we would not want to delay moving forward with this planning for bus rapid transit. And when I say that, I'm talking about both the construction of the bus rapid transit route and the application of the overlay district. So the first part is the county, part of approval of the Wake Transit Plan was a referendum to approve a special sales tax to provide revenue to build the bus rapid transit routes. That revenue is being generated currently. And so we do want for the bus rapid transit to start operating, to use that revenue to construct that service. So we do want it to move forward. And then we want the overlay to go along with that. And the reason I think, so that's why we shouldn't delay the bus service. And then why we shouldn't delay the overlay district is because, again, because the bus service, we expect the bus service to generate additional interest in people wanting to live in the areas along those corridors, along those routes. What we want to do is put zoning in place that says, if a property owner is going to redevelop their property, shouldn't they have an incentive? Shouldn't they have an encouragement to include affordable units? Because the alternative is not that the developer is not going to do anything. If the market makes sense for them to build a new apartment building, they're not going to say, well, the city didn't pass the overlay district, I guess I just won't build my apartment. They are still going to build it. They're just not going to have any reason to put affordable units in it. And so that's why we want to say, but before that activity gets underway, let's give them that incentive. But I agree. It needs to be a both and. We have to be having both of these conversations. The overlay district is not enough. The overlay district is not going to solve the housing problem. And displacement is a separate problem from whether housing is affordable. Absolutely. And so, yes, I think we need to be having all of those conversations, but I think it could be both and, not either or.
And I'll perhaps be redundant on a point that John made. The change in zoning allows for different outcomes if a property is redeveloped. And so much of the property along these corridors, Western Boulevard is the one we're talking about today, is zoned for 3-story development. When the TOD is mapped on those properties, the property owner can still develop that property if they choose to, redevelop it for a 3-story use. What the TOD overlay does is say, well, you can actually build a 5-story building there if and only if you include affordable housing. And so it's a way to incentivize the creation and development of affordable housing without using public funding. We have an affordable housing bond that the city is using to subsidize new developments and help operate all of the other affordable housing programs that the city operates. And so we use public bond funding to do that. We get money from the federal government and some money from the state to do those projects and to operate the programs that provide affordable housing and assistance to our low-income residents of the city. We're going to continue to do that. What the TOD does is add an extra way where new affordable housing can be created. That doesn't require any public money. It's all an incentive. If someone who owns a piece of property wants to develop their piece of property, that there's an incentive in place for them to have units that will be targeted at 60% AMI. So it's an additional tool to provide more housing and more affordable housing in these areas. And there is a relation to affordable housing in transit-rich areas where BRT is, because transportation costs are also very expensive. If you live in a place where you have to use a car for every trip you need to make, and that means you have to own a car. You may have to own 2 cars if you have a family. That means you have 2 car payments, 2 sets of insurance payments. You have to buy new tires frequently or regularly. You have to pay to maintain the vehicle. You have to pay tax, property tax on the vehicle. You have to pay gas for the vehicle. Transportation costs make up for up to 1/3 of household expenditures and incomes. And so if we have affordable housing in areas where people have less reliance and need to own 1 or 2 or more cars, then that helps free up more money in their budget for other things that they need in their lives, for savings, for retirement, for sending, for buying things for their children, for food, for going on vacation, for whatever people can spend their money on and not have to spend it on transportation. This reduces those costs. And paired with cheaper housing, less expensive housing, more affordable housing, that reduces the overall expense of living in these areas. There's 2 new hands up. I see a hand from Sybil Lattimore. Sybil, I'm going to ask you to unmute. You can unmute yourself now.
Good evening. The questions that I had, I wanted to know, I came in a little later. I wanted to know exactly when was the start date of the project? What date and what year is the project going to start? And
You're referring to the construction of the bus rapid transit service itself?
Yes.
It's not certain yet. So basically there are 3 bus rapid transit routes that are in progress right now. The first one that's likely to be operational is New Bern Avenue. So that will go east from downtown out past I-440 to New Hope Road on New Bern Avenue. That is projected to start construction, I believe, next year in 2023 and be operational by 2024. So operational meaning taking passengers. Then whether Western or Southern would be first, I think is still not super clear, but it sounds like Western is moving ahead. And I think is looking towards a 2026 construction and 2027 operational, if I remember correctly. And then Southern shortly after that. So like 2027 construction, 2028 operational. So, roughly, for this Western corridor, I think the expectation is taking passengers within 5 years from today.
All right. Thanks, John. I see a hand up from Aisha Cobb. Aisha, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi. First
Hi.
question.
Yep, we can hear you.
My first question, and I'm not trying to be funny, but can you get blood out of turnips?
Proverbially, no, you can't.
Right. So the plan basically is not going to work due to so many people as of residents, homeowners, and so on, that this affects. And just listening to the whole thing, I know Heritage Park, you said, is not really something that you could talk about, but it is combined because the city okays certain things that, you know, is being brought up to them. So as a tenant, as a resident, I'm not okay with this word that you keep using so highly as of we. When you say we does not include the people that are impacted. We includes, I guess, the city council, which is so devastating to hear because it sounds to me, regardless if I state my opinion to y'all or whatever, that y'all already have the plan set up and made. And to me, that's not okay. I've seen a lot of, I actually have done research and looked, and it does affect not just the minority, but others around. And if we're speaking out and telling you on top of what the developers or the planners are saying, why are we not being heard? That's number one. If there's red flags saying no, no, no in the same neighborhoods that y'all are trying to build through, that's a problem. And like Ms. Copeland stated earlier, the bigger plan for us is not for transportation to be built in our communities. Our plan, the bigger plan for me is to be able to figure out if I'm going to be able to stay in my community, which I love, within the next 2 years of the planning zone that y'all are rezoning that y'all are thinking about, you know. And I just want you guys to really think about, you know, our future. Because if we have no money now, and to catch up on the money that y'all already have, it's never going to happen. That's why I asked you, can you get blood out of turnips? We don't live in that, you know, mind frame that y'all are trying to put us in. We are just poor people trying to survive where we are. All this build up and all this, that's way past what we are supposed to be set on right now. They're trying to take our voices from voting, which I'm pretty sure you understand. You know, it's so much being stripped from us. We're sick of it. I know I am, for one. I have 3 children that will eventually end up in what y'all consider affordable housing, which is not affordable to their mother. I cannot afford to pay 60% AMI when I'm only paying 30 now. That just doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, the city of Raleigh, I've come down and spoke to y'all in person. I'm doing it over the phone via Zoom. But we're just sick of all these things that's being told to us. That's why I stood up for my community. I'm the only one in the community that chose to fight for our rights. We have rights as well as y'all do to stay and state how we feel, and it's not being heard. Every question that I put, even my little 2 cents I put up here, nobody said anything. So now it's my turn to speak. I'm just gonna let it out and let it be. But you know, we are being gentrified all the way around. And I don't want to be racist, but it's racist, you know? I mean, you can't just keep kicking us out of our communities for others to live better when we're already struggling right now. That to me just does not make sense. And so, you know, y'all have to take accountability of what y'all do as well, and putting people out of places that they don't want to go, making them homeless, stressing us out to live out here in places that we still can't get transit to, which would be in the countries and stuff like that. So that it doesn't benefit us at all. You know, we're okay with the bus system now. It doesn't need to be any more streets through our neighborhood as of right now, you know?
Can I ask, so it seems like you're referring to the street connection that's shown in the Western Boulevard corridor plan that is shown passing through Heritage Park.
Yeah, that and just the whole rezoning you know, around this community, people are losing their houses, all of that during the pandemic. I just think this is very cruel.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What impact do you think this zoning proposal is going to have on Heritage Park? I understand
Gives
that
Raleigh Housing Authority the okay to go ahead and rezone or redevelop as they already are planning to do, which we're not in alliance with that. We don't agree with that as well.
I see.
The
So,
AMI that we're
okay.
talking about, the AMI does not qualify for 60% low income. It just doesn't. I mean,
Well,
I don't.
so yeah, the thing that the height bonus in the overlay is households earning up to 60% of the area median income. So that is oriented towards a private, excuse me, private developer whose interest is making money. And so what we have hired consultants who basically have done the math and say, if I have a developer and they're capable of building a 3-story apartment that makes money, if you give them an extra 2 stories and require a certain number of those units to be affordable, they can probably still make money. So if their only goal is to make money, they'll probably provide you with some of these 60% AMI units. But in the context of Heritage Park, the Raleigh Housing Authority's goal is not to make money. Its goal is to provide housing. And Mr. Felton has said that they intend to have more than 100 units in the future form of Heritage Park that serve households earning 30% of the area median income or less, which, based on what you have stated, describes your household. So I guess the thing I'm trying to communicate here is this overlay district may facilitate the redevelopment of Heritage Park. And my understanding of the Housing Authority's goal is that the residents who currently live in Heritage Park will be given first priority to come back to Heritage Park.
That's not true. I'm going to say that right now. All of the units or all of the projects that Raleigh Housing Authority have done, which I've stated, and nobody is going to check behind it or anything, you have to be at a higher percent of income, or you have to be disabled. That's displacement. We can't come back. You understand? If people would look into the system and see Walnut Terrace, Chavis Heights, Halifax, you know, those are the same communities that was done. And I can't get over there now if I tried. And I'm still under Raleigh Housing Authority, okay? So that's the point that, you know, regardless if it has anything to do with the 2-way road that, you know, is being brought through now, just the whole thing does not make sense. You know, I mean, we're just being displaced. That's what it means. That's why we keep saying that, because that's what's happening. I mean, I don't understand why nobody's looking into it, but we're being displaced. They're telling us, oh, you're going to go over here and move somewhere else to another place. But at the same time, they don't have that many units. Heritage Park has 120 units now. So what's the difference between now and building up another 120 units? They're not even taken care of. That's the fight that we're doing right now, which the city should be looking into as well. We can't even get maintenance done over here. They're wanting to tear down our place because it's too old. You know, what kind of mess is that? I mean, really, that's not right.
I want to acknowledge your concerns and validate them, and say that I can't speak to that. I don't, you know, and I willingly take your word because you are the expert on your neighborhood. And so thank you for sharing that information. But I don't have a role in the management of Raleigh Housing Authority properties. And so, you know, I encourage you to reach out to your city council member and ask them for assistance in having that conversation. My role in this meeting at this time is to think about this rezoning process. And the way that I am seeing this is that the benefits for providing additional affordable housing units, including for very low income people in the specific context of Heritage Park, are positive for this rezoning. And, you know, again, I think your concerns are valid, and I want you to be successful in achieving your goals as a household and as an individual. I don't see that the zoning is interfering with those goals. But I would encourage, I'm happy to have more conversation later. We have reached pretty much the end of this meeting time, so we've been going for about 2 hours. So what I'd like to do is give everyone some information about how to continue participating, and then we'll say good evening. So again, the best way to participate at this point, first of all, tomorrow night, we are going to have essentially the exact same meeting, but more oriented towards the southern BRT corridor, which is South Wilmington Street to South Saunders Street to Garner. So that'll be tomorrow. That's Thursday, January the 20th. Again, at 6 p.m. So if you feel like you didn't have your questions answered at this meeting, you may wish to join that. I will say we will try to prioritize folks who were not at this meeting and who have specific questions about the southern corridor. But certainly it's going to be an open meeting. Anyone is welcome to come. And then the webpage for this process, Tod Mapping, is on the city website, raleighnc.gov. You can search Tod Mapping. If you want to give comments to be carried forward to the Planning Commission, please use the engagement portal on that mapping page. And we will be updating that page in the next week or so to make it as easy as possible to get to that survey. We will be working to set up a meeting with Heritage Park residents in the future. Be on the lookout for letters in the mail and signs posted for the next round of these meetings, probably in about 6 weeks to 2 months. And I'll ask my colleagues, is there anything that I missed in that wrap up information?
No, I don't think you missed anything. I'll speak for myself for a moment, and others in saying that we work with these really challenging concepts and community change issues and displacement every day. We hear you. I personally do as much as I can to see and hear every person when they bring this really real concern to my work, and I take it very seriously. And just want to say, this is not the last time you'll hear or see from us. You can call or email us anytime. I am always open and happy to have these really tough conversations with anyone, one-on-one or in any other context. And we'll continue to do so long as I work in this position and I work for the city of Raleigh. I am personally committed to that. And I look forward to those exchanges. So thanks everyone for being here. This is really, really challenging stuff for all of us to work through. So I just thank you everyone for your time.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Matt. I think we all feel similarly at the city. So thanks everyone for being here, and we want to hear from you soon. So have a good evening.